So, Corey, thank you for taking time to chat daughter. I think the last time we spoke was the very loud environment of the Phoenix Bar at Fright Fest. How was the journey with the film been since then?
It's been incredible. I could have never expected the reception of it to have been so positive. And I think I remember seeing your review at first and Anton's maybe the morning of the premiere at Fright Fest and thinking, wow, people actually like this movie. That's insane. And it's just sort of taken off from there. And we had our release in the US this past weekend and we had a great response. It's been incredible.
And one thing that sort of really stood out to me is the way that the story is told. I think a lot of father's basically setting up what he's starting his own family, community, cult, and these sort of organizations often have some sort of like pamphlet or steps and processes that you have to go through. And the story of daughter is broken up into chapters, which in a way sort of feels very much like your indoctrination into this environment. I was just wondering what prompted that storytelling device to break it down into chapters.
Yeah, that was actually a late addition to the edit. I don't know if you heard the full story of our like production troubles or halfway through our shoot, a brush fire forced us to evacuate something nearby, and we lost a day and a half out of our shoot schedule, which was only going to be, I think, 12 or 13 days to begin with. And we spent that weekend not knowing if we were going to be able to come back and finish the film or anything like that. And thankfully we were, but we weren't able to fully make up what we lost in that time period. So the final film was only about 85% of what was scripted. So in the edit, trying to figure out how can I still tell the story that I want to tell and create new cause and effect relationships between scenes and between bigger payoffs in the end, I had to find somewhat of a new structure to go into it with. And out of that came those chapter cards. But it was at that time the thought was, let me lead into the idea that father has his own little written manual to how this all works. So it did come from that, from the idea of father in his own book, his own set of rules, but it wasn't something that I'd originally intended for the film.
And the other thing that I absolutely love about the film is the way that you have constructed the look of the film. I like how the script is kept quite sparse in a way, and rather than having a lot of exposition, you're telling stuff about people's relationships and dynamics just through how they're positioned in the shot. When you meet father and daughter for the first time, there's mistrust there, and so the camera is really wide, and then mother and daughter, they're closer together, and daughter and son are somewhere sort of in the middle, and that fluctuates as the film progresses. How much time went into the construction of these shots? Was it purposeful, or is this just like my old media studies head like rearing its head?
Well, no, I mean, the cinematographer Hana Katasi and I, we prepped pretty extensively leading into the shoot and how we wanted to capture it. And from the very beginning, I wanted to try that 12 Angry Men sort of visual language where the size of the frame, who's in it, like is really meaningful in a way. And at first, the plan was to stay pretty wide throughout the first half of the film and not have as much movement as we did, but to really step back and show how distant these relationships were, and then only in the second half of the film start to finally push closer and move in as those relationships formed. And when we got onto the set, realizing that the location, the house in the film was a whole lot smaller than what it looks like in the movie because we were shooting pretty wide. So when we got there, I realized on a few different occasions that I couldn't actually physically put the lens as far away from the actors as I would have wanted to in order to shoot that way. So I had to take some of that, what would have been the second half creative design, and bring it up front as well. Like, I guess we've got to start doing these movements, and we've got to do that now. Otherwise, I would have to, cut and change a setup and go around. And that was something that I didn't want to do. So it was a little bit of like both the planning and then the necessity of how we ended up on the set became what the final visual language was. But the idea was to communicate as much as possible through those types, through the framing, through those types of movements, because I wanted to avoid that, characters saying how they thought and felt about each other. Let it be communicated with this own omniscient POV of the gamer.
Yeah, I mean, there's this great scene where it's story time, it's story night with father, and he's kind of like stood like looming over them, and then the other three characters are sat on the sofa. But even because daughter's still not sort of fully on board. There's just a cushion just in between the other two and her that just sort of almost subconsciously reinforces to the audience that, you know, she might look like she's, you know, she's part of the family, but she's not fully there yet.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to play around with just that idea of deliberateness and stuff like that in the staging and how in the body language of the actors, knowing that I was going to be doing something that wasn't necessarily reality. I don't really, you know, say what time period it is, what year, or anything like that. I don't really try to make it feel real in the movements and the way the dialogue is constructed. So I wanted to play with this idea that there were things about this world that would be a lot more deliberate, and those that sort of well, at least that's how it came about in that scene.
And sort of speaking of the, you know, the dialogue, you've got your two female characters who converse with each other in Vietnamese. And now at Fright Fest, I was told that not only are they talking, you know, in Vietnamese together, which is something that the other characters aren't privy to, but I think it's actually a very specific localized dialect of Vietnamese. Now that's something that's going to pass a lot of audience members by. Why did you decide to sort of keep that in there?
Well, that decision wasn't mine. That would have been Elyse Dinh, who plays Mother in the film, who between her and Vivien did the translations for those scenes and rehearsed it themselves. And you know, when it came to something like that, I think it's, you know, I'm taking on a role as a filmmaker to bring, in a way, someone else's culture to the forefront in this film. And in those instances, I felt like my job was to kind of just step back and let other people express themselves. When it came to the issues of Vietnamese representation, it was about creating space for Vivien and Elyse and to express what they wanted to express. And so the intricacies of the dialogue, that was all that was them. I can't take credit for that.
But it like when she shared that, I thought it was a really clever, sort of almost like little Easter egg in a way that will, I guess, enrich the experience for the Vietnamese community, because, you know, there's that like extra little bit of like, oh, this isn't just like, you know, rudimentary Vietnamese. This is a very sort of specific like subsect of it.
Yeah, we wanted to like just allow the identities of the actors, of the characters, to enrich everything that they were doing. And rather than, let's say, we're making it about Vietnamese identity, we're allowing it to be informed by that in really interesting ways, and ways that could be personal for them.
And much of the film is spent indoors. I think so often films that are set indoors, you know, you can tell that they become very sterile, very white. But in Daughter, you've almost brought the outside in. You know, the house is full of lots of shelves and woody furniture, and even the characters themselves, they're in sort of like an autumnal color palette of jumpers and textures. Yeah, at what stage did you decide that that's the way you wanted to go? Because I'm guessing, you know, an indie budget, you know, it would have just been, I guess, cheaper to go the normal whitewash route.
Yeah. I know for myself, I like a variety of texture in a frame in general. And that was something that I was looking for from day one. A lot of whether or not we were going to be able to make this film at all was going to be contingent on finding that location, because I didn't want it to be something that would just be shot in a normal contemporary looking house. I wanted to find something that would add a lot of its own personality to the frame, that from a production design standpoint, we would have to, you know, accent here or there and enhance, but we wouldn't have to necessarily build, because that would have been something that we couldn't have afforded on that budget. So a lot of the house, the shelves, that's the house. And we added our own decor and swapped out some of the furniture. But leading into the idea of, you know, deliberateness everywhere, the color palette, that's something that was part of the creative design going into it, even when certain colors would be allowed to appear in the frame, like the color red, what that would mean for Brother and his paintings and things like that. And it was all a matter of trying to be budget conscious, I think. And we really lucked out with that location. I found it on Santa Clarita, which is the city where we filmed in. It's the Film Commission website. Somebody was renting their house for productions, I think, a few months before they renovated. So it doesn't even exist like that anymore, the house. And we really lucked out.
And as father, you've got Casper Van Dien, who is a hugely likable, larger than life character. I mean, I've been to conventions where his microphone broke and like the dude does not need a microphone. He is, he's just such a buoyant character, but he's playing this stoic, withdrawn authoritarian. At what stage did you realize that he had that other side, that he could access this role? Because it's very different to what audiences will be expecting to see from him.
Yeah, I mean, I knew from day one that I wanted to cast against type. I wanted the audience to come in with an expectation of who the actor was, who the character might be, and then really try to subvert that. And in the case of Casper, it wasn't even another role of his that did it for me. It was just watching his natural state of being, who he is as a person, how he would answer questions in interviews, his energy, his tone of voice. And what was really important to me was for Father to really, sincerely believe what it is that he's doing is to protect his family. And I wanted that humanity to be at the core of the character as he's doing these terrible things. He has to believe it's for the greater good. And even an audience watching to hopefully believe that he believes it, or maybe start to believe it themselves. Or maybe, Father, is there something else that he's not telling us? Is there a reason why he's doing this? Because you feel that humanity in the person. And particularly towards the end of the film, you see how much he really does care about keeping his family safe. And Casper, again, it's just who he is that brought that to that role, I think, in a really interesting way. And whether or not he could go dark, I think that was the fun challenge for him, the actor. I think he read the script and was really led by curiosity to say, could I pull this off? I want to try, and we got some great results.
And Daughter has sort of a quite a simple premise, but it's one that's masking like a multitude of mysteries and enigmas within it. So there's no one definite interpretation of the film. How have you been enjoying audiences' differing responses?
That's been my favorite part, actually. Even when I first wrote the script and sent it to the cast for the first time, everyone had a slightly different interpretation of what they thought the film meant, either based on the character they were reading for or just something else in their own mind. So it's been really cool to see that continue as the audience is starting to receive it. Because in a way, that was the intent. There's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of questions that go unanswered. And I think the people who have enjoyed the film the most are the ones who realize that it was never really about answering the questions. So much as it was like where your mind is going to go and how you process the idea of living with maybe it's both, and maybe it's not one thing or the other thing. Maybe Father's not lying or telling the truth. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle, in that gray zone, what I call our ambiguity of existence. Like that's kind of what it was all about. And I think people that have embraced that have had a lot of fun with the film.
Yeah, and I know that you've been busy writing for other people, but have you had a chance to settle on the idea for your next project that you'll be directing yourself?
Yeah, I've got a few in the works. The one that looks like will be the next one that I direct is something that I wrote before Daughter, actually. That Daughter was a little bit of a creative experiment to see if I could create this visual style of my own as a filmmaker that I could take on to this other project. So the next thing I want to do would be more of I would say a little bit more of a traditional contemporary thriller, but still with that creative design of Daughter behind it. And then if I can pull that off from there, going on to maybe a larger budget version of something else that's sort of in my own reality in the way that Daughter was, see if I can get a little bit more weird and experimental now that I've gained a little bit more confidence in myself as a filmmaker.
So do you think that this is your path? You want to continue making your own stories? Are you ever going to get swayed like many other indie directors into the Marvel machine?
I'm not sure. That's one of those things where like I didn't grow up in comic books and stuff like that, so I didn't really have any personal draw to it. It might be one of those if the opportunity's there and it's fun, if it makes sense, then maybe. But I think at the end of the day, like, ever since I was a little kid, it was the idea of imagination that drew me to this, that I could just come up with something and express it in this way, and people could see the thing that was in my head that maybe didn't exist in the world prior. That's what excites me about this. Like, not just the job of it, or not just being able to tell a story or have a certain budget, but just the actual creative process is what I love about this. So anything that I can continue to do along that path, I think I will. And if I can get to a point in my career where I am able to take on bigger, Hollywood projects, things like that, and still bring my own creative aesthetic to it, then sure, let's see what happens.
Cool. Well, it's good to hear that you're kind of open to staying true to yourself, because there's so many of you indie guys. You get snapped up, and then we never get to see what the audience has fell in love with, again, which is a shame. So it's nice to hear that some of you are prepared to stay true to yourselves. But I am going to.
Also, I think I got lucky being able to work in TV also. Is also like writing producer TV. So being able to pay the bills that way has allowed me to not have to chase it as an indie filmmaker. And I can just continue to make smaller projects on my own and see what happens.
Cool. Well, I wish you the best of luck with the UK release of Daughter. And here's to more drinks in the Phoenix bar in the future.
For sure. Thanks so much.